She had no idea this one decision would change everything. Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the plane, exhaustion pressing on her shoulders like a weight she could no longer ignore. After a grueling day in Washington, she had finally made it. Her ticket to a moment of peace in first class. The soft leather seat, the promise of quiet, the escape from politics and media chaos. She had been looking forward to this for hours. But just as she reached her row, something made her pause. A glance toward the economy section, a single moment of hesitation. That's when she saw him. Sergeant James Carter, a retired Marine, shifting uncomfortably in his cramped seat. His face was lined with the stories of battles fought and sacrifices made, his movements stiff, as if even the smallest adjustment sent a ripple of pain through his body. He wasn't complaining, he wasn't asking for anything, but Karoline saw it, and in that instant, without thinking, she did something that left the entire plane in stunned silence. She turned around, walked back to his seat, and did what no one expected. She gave up her first-class seat to him, insisting he take her spot, and for a moment, there was nothing but quiet. Then, a ripple of reactions. Some passengers gasped, others exchanged glances. A flight attendant hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. But Sergeant Carter, his reaction was the one no one saw coming, because in that instant something happened that no one on board would ever forget. But what happened next sent shockwaves far beyond the walls of that plane. And when the truth came out, it changed everything. At first, it seemed like a simple act of kindness, one person recognizing another's sacrifice and making a small gesture to show respect. But as soon as Karoline returned to the economy section, taking Carter's seat without hesitation, murmurs spread through the cabin. Some passengers were touched, whispering about how rare it was to see something like this in today's world. Others, however, saw an opportunity. A few rows back, Rachel Sterling, a liberal TV host known for stirring controversy, pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved fast as she typed, crafting the perfect narrative before anyone else could. Karoline Leavitt makes a dramatic show of giving up her first-class seat. What a convenient PR stunt. Send. The tweet was out. The internet had been set on fire before the plane had even taken off, and as notifications began flooding her phone, Rachel smirked. She knew exactly what she was doing. Within minutes, opinions had split like a fault line, with some praising Karoline and others accusing her of staging the whole thing. But here's what no one realized, not even Karoline herself. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about something much, much bigger, because hidden beneath this moment was a truth that no one had uncovered yet, and once it came to light, it would shake the nation. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just another political figure. At 26, she had already shattered expectations, becoming the youngest White House press secretary in history. Fearless, articulate, and often at the center of controversy, she was a rising star in conservative politics. Her supporters admired her unapologetic stance, while her critics saw her as a calculated political operative. But whether you loved her or hated her, one thing was certain: she knew how to command attention. That's why, when a viral moment exploded from a routine flight, it wasn't just another news story. It became a national conversation, and at the center of it all, a single decision. One that would send shockwaves through the media, turning a quiet act of kindness into a battleground of narratives. But before we get to the chaos, let's understand the key players. Sergeant James Carter wasn't seeking attention. A retired Marine, he had dedicated over 2 decades of his life to serving his country, enduring the horrors of war and the quiet struggles that followed. Like many veterans, he carried wounds, some visible, some not. This particular flight wasn't just a routine trip. It was his journey back home after a medical consultation at a VA hospital. The years of service had taken a toll, and his body reminded him of it every day. All he wanted was a quiet, comfortable flight home. But life had other plans. As he sat in the cramped economy section, his knees ached, his breathing felt heavier than usual, and exhaustion settled deep into his bones. He had been assigned a first-class seat, a small token of appreciation from a veterans organization, but due to an administrative error, that seat was no longer his. Instead, he found himself squeezed into a row with barely any legroom, and no one seemed to care. No one, except Karoline Leavitt. Leavitt had just wrapped up a grueling week in Washington, her schedule packed with press briefings, political battles, and media firestorms. She was exhausted, looking forward to a rare moment of peace in first class. But as she made her way down the aisle, she noticed Carter's discomfort. Something about the situation didn't sit right with her. She had spent years defending conservative values, advocating for the military and speaking about the importance of honoring veterans. Now, in this moment, she had a choice: to walk past like everyone else, or to act. The hesitation was brief. She turned to Carter and offered him her seat. A simple gesture, a small act of kindness, or so she thought. Within seconds, the murmurs began. Passengers whispered, glances were exchanged, and before anyone knew it, a story was unfolding. A flight attendant hesitated before nodding. The offer was accepted, and Carter, caught off guard, reluctantly moved to first class. Applause erupted, but not everyone was impressed. One person in particular saw an opportunity, a way to twist the narrative into something far more controversial. Enter Rachel Sterling. A well-known liberal TV host, Sterling had built a career on stirring the pot, thriving on controversy and media spin. She had a talent for turning ordinary moments into political firestorms, and as she watched Leavitt's decision unfold, her instincts kicked in. The moment was too perfect, too clean. A conservative press secretary giving up her seat for a veteran? It smelled like a staged political stunt, and in an era where public perception could be manufactured with a few well-placed tweets, Sterling knew exactly what to do. Within minutes, her phone was out, fingers flying across the screen, as she live-tweeted the event. Karoline Leavitt conveniently gives up her seat for a veteran while the cameras roll. How long until Fox News spins this into sainthood? The internet was a wildfire, and she had just lit the match. The passengers on board had no idea that this quiet flight was about to become a media spectacle. Some saw the moment as genuine, while others began whispering doubts. Was this truly an act of kindness, or was it carefully orchestrated? The questions didn't stay confined to the plane. By the time the flight landed, social media was ablaze. Mainstream media had picked up the story, and both sides of the political spectrum had drawn their battle lines. Conservatives hailed Leavitt as a role model, while liberals echoed Sterling's skepticism, questioning whether this was a calculated move for public sympathy. But lost in the chaos was the man at the center of it all, Sergeant Carter, a man who wanted nothing more than to return home in peace. He hadn't asked for this attention, yet suddenly, he was a symbol in a war he never signed up for. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get more complicated, fate intervened. In the most unexpected way, Karoline Leavitt's heart was still pounding as she stood in the narrow aisle of the plane. The first-class seat she had just given up remained empty for a moment before Sergeant James Carter hesitantly lowered himself into it. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the seatbelt, his body still bearing the weight of his military service. The moment should have been simple, just an act of kindness between strangers, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. Whispers spread through the passengers like wildfire. Some pulled out their phones, snapping pictures. Others leaned in, trying to grasp what had just happened. And then, from the far end of the plane, a voice cut through the murmurs, sharp, incredulous, laced with manufactured outrage. It was Rachel Sterling. The liberal TV host had been watching everything, and she saw an opportunity. Her fingers moved swiftly over her phone screen, and within seconds her tweet went live. Karoline Leavitt's random act of kindness conveniently captured by cameras. Theatrics at 30,000 feet. Don't fall for it. The reaction was instant. Twitter ignited with debates, accusations, and conspiracy theories. Some hailed Karoline as a role model, praising her humility. Others latched onto Rachel's narrative. Was this just a publicity stunt, a staged political move? The passengers were no longer just observers. They were participants in an unfolding controversy, and the tension in the air thickened. The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that a viral storm had just hit their aircraft mid-flight. Karoline, oblivious to the chaos brewing online, had settled into an economy seat near the back. She didn't need comfort. She had spent long nights on campaign trails, slept in airports, worked through exhaustion. The thought of Sergeant Carter, a man who had risked his life for the country, struggling in a cramped seat while she sat in luxury, it hadn't sat right with her. But as she stared out the window, a notification lit up her phone screen. Her name was trending. Her act of kindness was now public debate. And then, the flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom, sending a ripple of shock through the cabin. "If there's a doctor on board, we need immediate medical assistance in first class." All heads turned toward the front. Sergeant Carter, his body slumped forward, his breathing erratic. A woman gasped. A man stood up but hesitated. Panic gripped the plane. The seat Karoline had given up was now at the center of an emergency. Within seconds, a passenger in scrubs rushed forward, identifying himself as a doctor. Flight attendants sprang into action, lowering the seat back and administering oxygen. Karoline bolted from her seat, pushing past stunned onlookers. "What's happening?" Her voice was tight with urgency. The doctor didn't look up. "His pulse is weak. This isn't just exhaustion." The word hung in the air. The implications were clear. Something was very, very wrong. Rachel Sterling, who had been eagerly documenting every moment, lowered her phone slightly, her expression shifting. She had played her game, twisted the narrative for engagement, but now the story was real, and there was no controlling it. As the minutes dragged on, the pilot's voice came through the speakers. "We're making an emergency landing." The plane lurched slightly as it altered course, heading toward the nearest airport. Karoline's fingers curled into fists. This wasn't about politics, narratives, or online discourse anymore. A man's life hung in the balance, and she couldn't shake the gut-wrenching feeling that if she hadn't switched seats, she might have been the one sitting beside him when this happened, the one who could have noticed sooner. Down on the ground, the media frenzy escalated. News outlets had caught wind of the viral debate, with headlines splintering into two competing narratives. Karoline Leavitt, selfless or staged? Liberal host calls out political theater. At 30,000 feet, veteran in crisis mid-flight. Did airline policies fail him? But as the plane made its descent, something far more shocking came to light. A flight attendant, pale-faced and visibly shaken, approached Karoline. "There's something you need to see," she whispered. The attendant led her to a small corner near the galley, where a printed passenger list lay on the counter. She pointed at one name, Sergeant James Carter. His original seat assignment wasn't in economy. It had been in first class. Karoline's breath hitched. "What?" The attendant nodded. "His seat was reassigned at the last minute. A system error." The weight of the revelation settled in. The airline had displaced a veteran, a man who had earned that comfort, who had been promised it, and shunted him to the back of the plane without a second thought. Karoline had assumed she was making a personal sacrifice, but in reality she had unknowingly corrected an injustice. And Rachel Sterling? She had spent the last hour dismantling an act of kindness that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. The plane touched down, emergency responders swarming the aircraft as soon as it reached the gate. Sergeant Carter was stabilized, his vitals improving, as he was rushed to the hospital. Karoline, still reeling from the discovery, stepped into the terminal, greeted by flashing cameras and microphones shoved in her face. Rachel Sterling was already live on television, refusing to back down. This was never about a seat. This was about a political figure crafting an image, and the timing, too perfect to be real. But then, another screen flickered to life. A news anchor interrupted the broadcast with breaking news. "Sergeant Carter has issued a statement from the hospital." The words that followed silenced everything. "I didn't know who she was when she gave up her seat." His voice was raspy but clear. "I just knew that someone saw me, really saw me. I didn't ask for this attention, I didn't ask for this debate, but I'll tell you one thing, I know sincerity when I see it. And Karoline Leavitt, she did something no one else on that flight did. She cared." The weight of his words sent shockwaves through the media. The carefully spun narratives collapsed under the weight of reality. The story wasn't about political theater or Twitter wars. It was about something far simpler, something that had been lost in the noise: human decency. Rachel Sterling's face darkened, her smug certainty flickering for just a second. But the damage had been done, to her credibility, to her argument, to the entire idea that kindness must always have an agenda. And Karolina, she didn't need to say anything. The truth had spoken for itself. The moment Karoline Leavitt gives up her first-class seat for Sergeant James Carter, it seems like a simple act of kindness, but within minutes the situation spirals into something much bigger. This isn't just a viral moment, it's a flashpoint in an ongoing cultural and political war. Why? Because in today's world, every public action is dissected, twisted, and weaponized. The question isn't just about Karoline's intent, it's about how different forces manipulate public perception. To truly understand what happened on that flight, we need to break it down layer by layer, revealing the hidden forces at play. Was this an innocent moment, or part of something much deeper? Let's start by looking at the immediate impact of the incident. As Rachel Sterling live tweets the situation, mainstream media outlets pick up the story at lightning speed. Within hours, political analysts, social commentators, and PR experts are debating Karoline's motives on live television. Dr. Andrew Morrison, a media ethics professor, explains, "What we're seeing here is a textbook case of how narratives are shaped. Karoline's action is objectively positive, but in the modern media landscape nothing is left untouched. There's always an angle, always a spin. The divide is clear. Conservative voices praise her as a role model, while liberal commentators, led by figures like Sterling, frame it as performative grandstanding. But what's the real truth? To answer that, we need to analyze both Karoline's past actions and the broader historical context of politicians engaging in public gestures. Karoline Leavitt, as the youngest White House press secretary in history, has built her reputation on boldness. She's no stranger to media firestorms, having previously clashed with journalists over policies, press briefings, and even personal attacks. Political strategist Jonathan Reed notes, "Leavitt has always understood optics. Whether you agree with her politics or not, she knows how to control a narrative that makes people suspicious of anything she does in the public eye. But does that mean her gesture wasn't genuine? Not necessarily. To understand the psychology behind such acts, we turn to Dr. Susan Whitmore, a behavioral analyst specializing in political behavior. She explains, "Human beings are hardwired to be skeptical of powerful figures showing kindness because we've been conditioned to assume there's an ulterior motive. But genuine altruism does exist, even in the political world. The key is whether the action was planned or spontaneous." So let's analyze the critical moment. Karoline saw Sergeant Carter struggling and immediately gave up her seat. There were no cameras, no reporters, just passengers on a plane. That suggests spontaneity. But once the story broke, did she leverage it for political gain? That's where things get interesting. A PR firm quickly released a statement on her behalf, praising her decision. Was that strategic, or simply a necessary response to the media storm that was already brewing? To answer this, let's compare this situation to similar past events. Historically, public figures performing acts of kindness have faced similar scrutiny. When Princess Diana famously shook hands with an AIDS patient in 1987, breaking stigmas, critics accused her of doing it for publicity. But history remembers it differently. It became a pivotal moment in changing public perception of the disease. More recently, in 2019, actor Keanu Reeves was seen giving up his first-class seat for a soldier, and the internet hailed him as a hero. But unlike Karoline, he wasn't a political figure. He had no policy agenda that critics could tie to the act. That's the key difference. When a politician does something kind, the world demands to know if there's a hidden agenda. But there's another angle here that's been overlooked. Sergeant Carter himself. What was his reaction to the firestorm that erupted? Close sources reveal that he was uncomfortable with the media frenzy, feeling like he had been turned into a political pawn. "I didn't ask for any of this," he reportedly told a fellow passenger. "I just wanted to get home." This highlights a deeper issue, the way veterans are often used in political debates without their consent. Military historian Dr. Alan Roberts points out, veterans are frequently caught in the crossfire of culture wars. They're either used as symbols of patriotism or as examples of neglect, depending on the narrative being pushed. In this case, Carter was neither. He was just a man trying to get through a flight suddenly thrust into the spotlight. But what about Rachel Sterling's role in all this? As a media personality, she understands how to manufacture outrage. Experts analyzing her tweets noticed a pattern. Her initial post was neutral, simply describing what happened. But as reactions flooded in, she adjusted her messaging, fueling controversy by implying Karoline's motives were questionable. This is a classic media manipulation technique known as narrative escalation. Dr. Lisa Caldwell, an expert in media influence, explains, "First you introduce the event, then you let public reactions dictate your next move. If outrage is brewing, you pour fuel on the fire to keep engagement high. The result? The internet divided into two warring factions, each seeing only what they wanted to see. At the same time, The veteran's medical emergency mid-flight introduced an entirely new layer to the story. According to aviation health experts, high-altitude conditions can worsen pre-existing medical conditions, and Sergeant Carter's collapse raised questions about airline policies. Could this have been prevented? Did stress play a role? Medical analyst Dr. David Rosen speculates, it's possible that the emotional intensity of the situation elevated his blood pressure, contributing to the collapse. But without full medical records, we can't say for certain. What we do know is that his condition sparked debates about how airlines accommodate veterans, with some arguing that more should be done to ensure their comfort. So what does this all mean? Is this just another internet controversy, or is there a deeper takeaway? Political analysts say this incident encapsulates modern media polarization. Every story is no longer just a story, it's a battlefront in a larger ideological war. But beyond the headlines, beyond the social media arguments, there's a simple truth. A woman gave up her seat for a veteran. That moment, in its purest form, wasn't political, but everything that followed turned it into something much bigger. Now, as Sergeant Carter recovers and Karoline faces both praise and scrutiny, one question remains. Will this moment be remembered as an act of kindness or as another chapter in the endless cycle of media-driven outrage? The answer depends on who controls the narrative next, and that battle is far from over. As the world continues to argue over Karoline Leavitt's decision, a confidential airline report is suddenly leaked to a top investigative journalist. At first, it seems like just another routine document, until a single line changes everything. Buried deep within the flight records, there's a shocking detail that no one had seen before. Sergeant James Carter's seat wasn't just any seat. It was originally his. A veterans organization had booked it for him weeks ago as part of an honorary program recognizing wounded war heroes. But then, due to an internal airline error, his reservation was mistakenly switched to economy. He was never supposed to be in that cramped back row. He was meant to be in first class all along. The moment Karoline Leavitt gave up her seat, she wasn't just making a selfless gesture. She was unknowingly correcting a massive mistake. The truth was right there, hidden in the paperwork, yet no one had noticed it until now. And the moment this report goes public, everything turns upside down. Rachel Sterling, the liberal host who had spent days dragging Karoline through the mud, now finds herself in an impossible position. Every argument she made, every claim she pushed, every accusation she hurled at Karoline is about to backfire in the worst way possible. The truth isn't just embarrassing for her, it's devastating. Her entire version of events collapses in real time. But instead of admitting she was wrong, Rachel doubles down. She refuses to acknowledge the report, calling it suspicious and conveniently timed. On live television, she sneers at the findings, claiming they were likely fabricated by Karoline's allies. This doesn't change the fact, she snaps, that Karoline Leavitt made a calculated political stunt. But just as she's about to move on, her producer frantically signals to her, something is happening. A new video has just been released. Not from Karoline, not from the airline, but from Sergeant Carter himself. In a surprise move, the veteran finally breaks his silence, releasing a statement that shatters everything. His face is pale, but his voice is steady. I didn't ask for this attention, he begins. I never wanted to be a part of this media circus, but there's been too much dishonesty and I can't stay silent anymore. He looks directly into the camera, his words slow and deliberate. Rachel Sterling, you lied about me. You lied about her. And the world deserves to know the truth. The moment his statement drops, it's game over. Millions watch as he lays out exactly what happened, how his seat was meant to be in first class, how Karoline didn't just give up her seat but unknowingly gave him back what was rightfully his. This wasn't a stunt, it wasn't staged, it wasn't politics, he says firmly. It was one good person doing the right thing when no one was watching. And yet, people like Rachel Sterling tried to turn it into something ugly. His voice hardens. I won't stand for it, I won't let my name be used for your lies. And then, the final bombshell. Sergeant Carter drops a lawsuit against Rachel Sterling, against the network that spread the false narrative, against everyone who used his name to push an agenda. The moment this news breaks, the internet explodes. The same people who were attacking Karoline just hours ago are now erasing their tweets, deleting their comments, and pretending they never took part in the smear campaign. And Rachel? She's trapped, completely cornered. Her usual smugness is gone, replaced by panic. For the first time in her career, she has no comeback, no spin, no way out. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt remains silent. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't fire back. She simply steps off her next flight, greeted by a massive crowd. Supporters, veterans, ordinary citizens who now see her not as a politician, but as something rare in Washington, a person who does the right thing even when no one's watching. But as she walks through the terminal, her phone buzzes. A message from Sergeant Carter, 2 simple words, "Thank you." She doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she looks up at the sea of people around her, at the world that has just witnessed truth defeating lies. And for the first time in days, she smiles. Karoline Leavitt steps off the plane, the weight of everything that just happened pressing down on her shoulders. She doesn't know that the entire world is watching, dissecting every second of what unfolded in the sky. The decision she made, in a split second, giving up her first-class seat for a veteran, has spiraled into a media storm, a political debate, and a symbol of something far greater than she ever intended. But at this moment, she's just thinking about one thing. Did she do the right thing? Sergeant Carter, now safely in the hands of medical professionals, is regaining his strength. His sudden collapse mid-flight had sent shockwaves through the passengers, but what truly changed everything was his final words before being wheeled away. Karoline Leavitt did something that shouldn't even be news. This is what America is supposed to be. That single statement, spoken with raw honesty, shattered the entire media frenzy. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about strategy. It was about something much deeper: humanity, respect, and the simple act of doing what's right, even when no one is watching. But was anyone ever really watching the truth? Rachel Sterling, the liberal TV host who had twisted the story for her own gain, is now facing a reckoning. The leaked airline report proved that Sergeant Carter was originally meant to have the very seat Karoline gave up. Her entire narrative collapses in real time as networks scramble to correct their headlines, but some damage can never be undone. The internet, once quick to cancel Karoline, is now turning on Sterling. Viewers flood her social media, demanding accountability. A high-profile sponsor drops her show. And just like that, the woman who built her career on controlling the narrative finds herself at the center of one she can't escape. But this isn't just about her downfall. It's about something much bigger. The entire country is now asking, how many times has the media manipulated the truth? How often do we judge people without knowing the full story? And if the facts had never come to light, would the world have believed a lie? For Karoline, none of that matters right now. As she walks through the airport, she sees people watching her, whispering. Some look at her with admiration, others with skepticism. But then a woman steps forward, an elderly lady wearing a Marine Corps widow's pin. Without saying a word, she reaches out, takes Karoline's hand, and squeezes it. No cameras, no headlines, just a moment of silent understanding. And in that instant, Karoline realizes something. The noise of the media will fade, the internet will move on, but the people who truly matter, they will remember, and maybe that's enough. What do you think? Was this all just a moment of kindness, or does it reveal something deeper about the way we see the world? Maybe it's time to start questioning the narratives we're fed. Maybe it's time to decide for ourselves what's real and what's just a story.